least.
It is, isn't it? It's terrible. It's
Not
terrible.
at all. It's great, man.
Well, folks, thank you for joining us. It's 5 p.m. in Sydney. Please, in your chat, tell us where you are. Tell us where you are in the world. Hung is where are you in London? Hung, whereabouts?
I'm based in sort of East London, so Hoxton, Old Street, that kind of place.
Nice, very cool, very cool, very cool area.
Yeah, it was a good place to hang out back in the day when you could hang out. So yeah, I'm not seeing too much of it right now, but yeah, hopefully when the lockdown sort of ends, I'll be able to go out and enjoy it a bit.
For sure, for sure. Well, folks, put it in your chat box where you are. Tell us where you're coming in from, where in the world. Please tell us in the chat, and we can see you come in, take a seat. Folks, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ian Collier. I work for Hanover Fairs and put together the Tech Fest portfolio of events. It's my pleasure this evening to welcome a true keynote from the recruiting world. And he's actually a fella from the same part of the world as me, so added kudos for that. He's from the northeast of England. So there'll be two of us on the line that you might not be able to understand as well. We have been putting together some sessions which are looking at the world of HR and L&D right now, and it's wonderful to have Hung here. We are about putting content there that is out there that is going to be relevant to you and to the community. And if you have any thoughts about what we are seeing or what Hung is going to be saying, because I'm not going to be saying too much over the next 30 minutes or so, just please shout out, or anything going forward, please do that. Hung, we are hoping is going to be flying out to New Zealand at some point or towards the end of this year to our events. All being well, everything being crossed. And I know that he's just jumping off online sessions that he had last week, which went for 24 hours. So I think you probably have got, you're certainly used to being online, Hung. So it's a pleasure having you with us. And I basically just want to hand over to you. And just welcome. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. Thank you very much for the welcome as well, Ian. A real pleasure to be with you. And yeah, absolutely. Fingers crossed I can get over to Asia Pac, particularly Australia, New Zealand later on this year. I had real high hopes to be able to attend the wonderful conferences that you've organized. So it was actually a huge blow to know that we weren't able to do that. Okay. Welcome everybody. Definitely happy to chat about before COVID and after COVID. That was the kind of the brief of the talk. I want to prepare basically a brief slide deck, which I wonder whether might be a good sort of opportunity to run through. But to give you a bit of context before I do that, Ian, and everyone here, essentially, it's clear that this event has really impacted, the wider world beyond recruitment. We feel it in our day-to-day living. You don't need me or anybody else to tell you how significant this is. But I thought, given the fact that we're talking about the HR and recruiting world, what would be a good way to think about it would be to kind of apply the lens of, what the direct impacts might be to the work that we do. And I've extracted a few of those ideas, kind of put them into the lens of, okay, what does traditional recruiting look like before and after COVID-19, and what recruiters need to be doing right now in order to prepare for that future. So that's the general structure of the talk. Basically, the impacts, first order impact of COVID-19, what are the second order effects of that, and then how do recruiters respond? Do you want me to crack on with the presentation, Ian? I'm happy to just pound through this. Or
yes, crack on.
Yep, cool. Oh, by the way, if anybody's got any questions in the chat, please do ask them. I'm going to go full screen now, so I suspect I won't be able to see those chats, those messages. But Ian, if you could kind of interact with the folks there or pop in questions on their behalf, then I'll be happy to try and do that.
Absolutely, I will do. Yeah, anybody have any questions? I will ask. Hung, no worries.
Cool. I'm going to share screen right away. Let's just share the entire desktop. Why not? Got nothing embarrassing there, I hope. Okay, so we go here. I think I'll just go slideshow. Cool. Does everyone see my screen okay? It says moving recruiting from BC to AC.
Yes.
Yep, cool. Oh, slideshow is moving, which it shouldn't do. Okay, cool. So let's just run through this. It's only about 30, 40 slides. It should be maybe half an hour max. Any questions you have, please do go ahead and ask away. Okay, so just to reiterate, we know this is a big deal. I know there's still a few outliers out there that continue to say, hey, listen, just keep your head down, everything's going to be just fine. I don't think that argument is realistic or tenable. I'm not here to try and sort of give you false optimism, which I think could be quite damaging. So this is how I see what is going on. It kind of comports with the general consensus that this is going to be a very deep and significant economic retrenchment. And that will have direct impact, of course, in the work that we do. Some examples, some data points. So this is all from IMF, by the way. You can see the the lockdown, as it's now called, the Great Lockdown in comparison to the global financial crisis, the GFC 2009. We're looking at a significant reduction of global growth, of gross domestic product. That is way beyond what the GFC might have experienced, that we experienced during the Great Financial Crisis. Again, this is information, data point from the IMF. We're talking about something like 9 trillion USD that is lost from the global economy due to the public health crisis and the measures taken by governments worldwide to try and suppress the spread of COVID-19. And a bit of a regional breakdown here to see how that looks like. You can see that every region is affected, but some more so than others. And that's also a caveat that's worth underlining because every region and every country obviously has slightly different economic makeup and indeed different public health policies also, which might impact how quickly we might get back to, or how quickly we might be able to restart and recover the economy. So these are global figures. It may be different in different places. It will be, in fact, there'll be regional variance, but everything is definitely minus from what it was or what it should be, given the events of the last several months. So second order effect for us is layoffs, redundancies, and furloughing of staff. Again, no need for me to bang on about this. This is not news anymore. A lot of us have directly felt this. Or I've borne witness to it, or I've seen sort of, operationally, a big slowdown in a lot of the work that we traditionally do. Some examples here again, some data points. We're looking here, International Labour Organization. This is the the World WTO organization, which tells you that something like 38% of the world's workers are at risk of layoff as a result of COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown that a vast percentage of the world's economies are currently undergoing. 38% of the world's workforce. Just understand what that number really is. Okay, this is the numbers of Americans who have filed for unemployment in the last 5 weeks. And you can see the historical trend line at the bottom there. And the very narrow red line at the right of that chart looks like it's something like a design error, because it is completely off the scale, nearly off the chart in terms of the numbers of American people who are making unemployment claims and benefits. These are people, of course, that have been turfed out of work or have been made redundant. Bear in mind, the US, for instance, has very different workers' rights, very different policies in terms of social welfare. So the impact of people being let go in this way is hugely significant. These folks are going to stop spending money. They won't have any money to spend. They may not be able to pay rent. They may not be able to do a lot of things. So the cascade effects of all of these people being out of work will be enormous in what is still the world's most significant economy. So this is the projection, I think, from McKinsey, something like 1.25 billion workers currently in at-risk industries being at risk of being made redundant. That's more or less a sixth of the world's population, isn't it? Not insignificant figures. So what's the impact for us in recruiting? Obviously, follow-on job losses. We're not immune to this. And in fact, recruiters depend on growing companies in order to do our work, whether we're agency recruiters or internal recruiters or however which way we do our jobs within our industries. We need growing companies and growing economies in order for us to really fulfill our function. So if the economy is going to retrench in a way that people suspect it will do, and it's already showing signs of doing, of course, that will mean follow-on job losses for us in our jobs. And some examples of this, you can see this already. These are, there's any number of spreadsheets now going around where basically recruiters who are being made redundant or looking for work, publishing themselves on spreadsheets and saying, look, we're available. This is data. I think this is a spreadsheet created out of Europe, but there's several going on everywhere in the world. There's a great one happening in Australia, for instance. People are just throwing these up and saying, look, we're now looking for work, basically out of work. You're starting to see this type of behavior from vendors. Social Talent, actually, one of the great recruiter training companies around, run by Johnny Campbell, a good friend of mine. And, you know, he is aware that such as the level of people that have been made redundant, he's made a big part of his training service free for organizations or individuals that have been in that position. And this is, of course, just one of many examples of people who sell into the recruitment industry, providing what I call community plus type services in recognition of the fact that we recruiters are actually losing our own jobs. And at a personal level, I mean, people who know me know that I basically send an email out to tens of thousands of recruiters every week. Occasionally, that means some recruiters send me emails back. And over the past several weeks, I've been inundated with some of the some really painful messages from people who are looking who are just signaling to me their distress and what is going on. So, quick example here from a person who I don't know. But this is a response that I get quite regularly. Whenever I send out the Sunday newsletter, I get responses of this type. Very tough for me to read. So all of these things are happening. These are signals, obviously, that our industry is under huge stress as a result of contracting economies worldwide. Any case, we're doing something about it. As you mentioned, Ian, we did the Brainfood Marathon 2 weeks ago. That was the idea of trying to collect a lot of the people who are looking for work, recruiters, HR people currently out of work. Let's get them all together. Let's get them talking. Let's connect them with organizations that are providing support. We had about 3,000 people registered for that. An amazing event, one that hopefully we don't have to repeat because of the circumstances that kind of created it in the first instance. But the fact that so many people were involved and wanted to take part, I think, was evidence that the industry recognizes that we are at the front line of the economic fallout here. Other things we're trying to do, I've launched a Food Hall of Fame. This is my way of helping recruiters. So sign up to this. You can advertise your availability. This site crashed within the first minute of it being launched because so many people were hitting it and trying to sign on. We've now got hundreds of recruiters and HR people and marketeers working in recruitment, all getting in here and saying, look, I'm available 10 hours a week. I'm available 30 hours a week. I'm available 11 hours a week, whatever it is. Free to use. I totally recommend you get into it if in fact you have some sort of idea that you might have some job insecurity or income insecurity. And I've created a chatbot. This is also there to help. It will eventually carry jobs for recruiters and HR people. So if you want, you can message hello to that message now, and the chatbot will engage with you, and hopefully we'll be able to start servicing information, connections with experts, and eventually job opportunities, so that again, you've got another channel to try and source work. Okay, what does all that mean? It means for recruiters, we have to do a couple of things. We need to either pivot, diversify what we do, or we build social capital. Ideally, we do all three if we can, but I think those are the three pathways we have right now as recruiters. The pandemic has really flipped the economy in the sense that, yes, there's hiring freezes, reductions of, there's redundancies, and all kinds of industries are getting hammered. But there's also a spike in demand in some other industries, particularly emergency worker hiring. So one of the things that recruiters do very well on is to understand this and jump from one sector to the other in order to service that need. Typically, in any kind of economic depression or recession, things shift from permanent to contract, and they shift to kind of the, I wouldn't say low-level skill, because we want to get away from putting a hierarchy of skills, really. But we move to a world where essentially the assessment criteria is different. Availability is the most important thing. Example, look at farming. There's a farming crisis right now globally because we don't have enough people to pick fruit. A lot of this was dependent on immigrant labor, let's not forget. People who come into countries seasonally to do work. Well, during lockdown, people aren't moving anymore. We can't have the immigration that we depend on. So suddenly there's a lot of work, huge demand for this type of activity. This, of course, is an opportunity for recruitment supply. Again, you look at the information you get from any aggregator, Indeed or Adzuna or Seek even perhaps, over in ANZ. And you'll find certain industries that have this huge spike in hiring, retail, for instance, warehousing, obviously public healthcare, sanitation workers. All of the key workers that we currently need during this pandemic have a recruitment crisis and probably need recruitment support. So pivoting from your current vertical or niche into those areas might be a smart short-term action recruiters could and should take if you want to, securitize your revenue. Second option. Oh, here's another idea. If you want to take a little bit longer term, who is currently getting funding? This is taken from a VC over in the States where, okay, we know that venture capital is also slowing down in terms of what is being invested in, but there are also bets being placed on organizations and industries which the VCs believe will not only survive but thrive after the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, health tech, biotech, cybersecurity, analytics, food tech. Those are all industries where if you're a smart recruiter, then you should basically be spending some time building relationships and potentially getting in there now. That money is there. It's going to be spent. These companies are still hiring. Okay, diversify. That means how do you stay valuable to your recruitment clients when they actually don't need your core service of recruiting? There's loads of content out there. I picked out this post from Firefish because they, I think, speak very well to the recruitment agency market. And they provide a pretty good guideline as to how you should behave. Basically, think about the pain that your clients are currently undergoing and how you can best support. They currently have employer branding issues. They currently have candidate relationship issues. They don't know how to communicate with their audience. All of those things, they're shifting to remote work, let's say. Can recruiters provide services and value add in those places? This, by the way, is reflected for internal recruiters also. Primary sort of core function internal recruiters have is obviously to hire people, but when your company stops doing that, it makes sense for you to diversify and think about how you stay valuable to your internal customers. And it's more or less the same kinds of things. How can you support on messaging? How can you support an employee experience? Can you build talent pool? Can you build community to help the company when they emerge from the downturn? And finally, and related to the last point, build social capital. I take out this example as Khan, basically a rec to rec in Sydney, I believe. He joined us in the marathon. And the reason why I invited him to do that is because he saw this opportunity. He saw the situation not as an opportunity to make money, because he realized that it was not the market to really do sales, but it was the market to build what I call social capital. And what he was doing was basically providing a lot of his services for free in order to help recruiters find work. He recognized, like I think we all begin to recognize, that job insecurity in our industry right now is very high. And the last thing we need is people kind of trying to hustle too hard for a commission. So he's providing support to candidates and to organizations in order to help recruiters and people associated in the recruitment business into new work, and doing that for free. Obviously a temporary thing, but the reason why he's doing that is not only because it may be the right thing to do now, but he's also accruing a great deal of social capital, meaning he's building profile, he's building brand, he's getting into the sort of the mind space of someone like me, who's putting him on a presentation to an audience like you guys. So he's building his brand using the opportunity now for market growth. For basically mind share in a market that isn't growing, should I say? Okay.
Hang on. I've just while we're on that point, I've got a question if I can.
Yep, go ahead.
From Vito, he said that yes, pivot sounds like recruiters will need to reinvent themselves given that supply will outstrip demand for the foreseeable future, and that they need to have a laser focus on growth segments in a post-COVID world. What do you think of that?
I think that's true. I think there's certain industries that will take too long to recover in order for us to continue to make a living. Let's say you're an agency that's delivering to the restaurant industry, for instance. We may be seeing the end of the restaurant industry as we understand it. There's no point in us kind of riding a dead horse, perhaps. We need to be smart. One of the things that recruiters are very good at, I think, is being sensitive to these market trends, because we feel it in our pockets straight away. We need to do those deals in order to see the commissions. So if we're seeing sort of certain industries really cratering, and the most obvious ones are sort of the entertainments, the travel, the leisure, anything that basically involves people traveling and spending money, disposable income. Maybe those aren't great spaces for us to operate in. Critical worker stuff, definitely. And again, you look at the slide deck in terms of how or where investment money is currently going. They're making bets 5-10 years down the line. Those types of VCs, they're going to be growth markets for us. There'll be new jobs, definitely. So recruiters, I think, will definitely be around. But it's also a case where we need to be smart enough to recognize that some of the old verticals that we used to operate in may not actually be viable places for us to trade anymore. Cool. So moving on, this is a very famous quote by Mark Cuban, who was interviewed, I think by MSN or CNBC. And he basically said something I think resonated, which was how companies respond to coronavirus will define their brand for decades. And this is a role where I think recruiters and HR folks have got a key role to play, because we can support organizations in making sure that we're treating workers in the right way, be they candidates or employees, be they individuals, let's say in current recruitment process that you've had to freeze. How are you speaking to that person? If you're working more on the HR side and you've had to let people go, how are you treating your furloughed or redundant employees? All of this is super important. So even though our core functions, which typically are there to support business growth, might now no longer be there, given the fact that businesses are going the opposite direction, we have to kind of rethink what value we can add on this, and help our companies build social capital in this way. Second order effect number 2. We're all experiencing it right now. I guarantee you almost everyone watching this is working from home, or sitting at home, or sitting in a kitchen or a lounge or somewhere like that. There's been a mass shift to remote working. Some of us were already doing this, by the way, so this is an existing underlying trend. All of us had some experience, I would guess. If you're an office worker, all of us have probably had some experience of a work from home situation, but never have we all been kind of sent home in a mandatory manner at the scale that we have done. And there's going to be huge impacts for us in recruiting as a result. So just a quick example. This is a bit of data from Recode, and it shows an upward trend. I mean, basically, this is an underlying trend that was happening in any case, and it was all kind of heading northeast before even COVID arrived. But this is what has occurred since COVID-19. These are the lockdown measures that are happening globally, with a few kind of divisions in terms of how significant it is. But you can see there's huge population centers, including almost all of Europe, huge population centers like India, China, two-thirds of the world's population right there, and big swathes of the US also, particularly on the east and west coast, which typically are the economic powerhouses of the US, have been locked down. So all of these people, we're talking, I think, something like 2 billion people potentially quarantined. That is an unprecedented situation for us on planet Earth. So a quick example from some of the tech. This is Microsoft Teams, our competitor product to Zoom, actually. And you can see just the amount of minutes that have been spent on Zoom, effectively virtual meetings, in the space of 2 weeks. You know, you look at March 16 down here. Let's see if I can highlight that. 900 million minutes were spent doing sort of in March 16, just what, a month ago, 900 million minutes were spent. And now 2 weeks later, 2 billion minutes spent on virtual meetings. So we're talking exponential growth of people working from home and doing their best to try and operate their businesses and do their jobs in a totally different type of scenario. Okay, so what is the impact for recruiters? Well, we have to have a massive shift in recruiter skills. Recruiters, whether we're agency or in-house, typically work in co-located environments. In fact, if you think about anybody who's an agent, busy sales floor, that's, you know, noisy sales floor, close proximity with other salespeople, that's classic recruitment behavior, and how entry point for most of us who have gone into that industry. If you're working as an internal recruiter or a HR person, absolutely, you'll also be co-located in office, typically working in close proximity with the people or teams that you'll be recruiting for. Now that we're all shifted from home, there will be a kind of a concurrent shift in the required recruitment skills that we need to use. Quick example. When you're co-located, for instance, in communication, you can see there's some very different priorities. In a co-located environment, verbal communication often trumps the written, because you can have the over-the-desk conversation, or you can walk over to the boss's office, or you can tap someone on the shoulder, or you can bump into them in the lounge, and you can have a valuable verbal conversation there. This cannot be done in a distributed environment. Therefore, written documentation, written communication becomes more important in this scenario. Question for us recruiters: are we any good at written communication when we're talking to our colleagues? Have we been used to doing things verbally? We need to redevelop our skills in the writing, in making written communication. Synchronous versus asynchronous. This is probably the most important part of it. When you're working in a co-located environment, things are almost always synchronous. You're literally in the same room, you know, and you're therefore able to close the gaps really quickly in a team meeting or even in an over-the-desk type conversation. Distributed environment, you can't have that. Earlier today, Ian wasn't even sure I was going to show up because I wasn't physically there. If I was in the room, he could be assured I was going to be here. But because we weren't, asynchronous communication becomes much more important, meaning, again, written stuff rather than verbal stuff. And you look at hours, for instance, co-located is almost always fixed. There's a 9-to-5 schedule. You know, very few people rock up at 6 in the morning and leave at 3. You know, there's often requirements for special dispensation for this to occur. You don't take your lunch at 4. You know, if you did, your boss might have a question mark. Why are you taking an hour off at this time? Fixed schedule, fixed hours in a co-located environment. Distributed environment, it's ridiculous to even police that. You know, we accept that everyone now has flex schedules. There's no question if someone wants to take a lunch at 2, 3, 4, or whatever. We're not monitoring the schedule anymore. So all of these require, these are differences in the operating environment that a lot of us are not used to. And we need to redevelop our skills in order to perform well in these places. We cannot continue.
Well, I've got a question for you, Can. Some of the stuff you've talked around there in the work from home piece, do you think that has dealt a fatal blow to these skilled agencies like the Hays or the traditional consultants sitting in a pod in a CBD office?
I would never back against one of those big boys. I think they've got. I mean, you don't build a $1 billion turnover business like that and not have smart people that know how to run a business. What I do see though is that there will be, on the agency side at least, an acceleration of the fragmentation of that industry. Again, this is an underlying trend that we've borne witness to. Basically, it's become easier and easier for an individual agent to set up a business and start trading. That is a trend that is very much tied with communication technology. I think now that we've sent everyone home and when everyone's trying to work from home, a lot of recruiters are sitting there thinking, yeah, I can do this now. And why do I need to pay the vast amounts of my commission to this big brand when in fact, I think I'm doing all the work. So I think what we will see is after COVID-19, we're probably already seeing it if everyone's tracking this, an increase of the numbers of companies, staffing companies that are one-man bands, a great deal of fragmentation, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes not. A lot of recruiter agents are also being let go. Their first sort of position is probably going to set up by themselves and start trading, right? Because there's no other jobs out there. So I think it will accelerate. Is it the end of Hayes, Adecco, those guys? No, of course not. The way in which they recruit has always been through graduate entry anyway. And when you are kind of pipelined by a graduate entry scheme, in many respects, this kind of just replicates a university style environment, and there's attractions for a 21-year-old wanting to go in and meet a bunch of other people. So I think that will persist. But yeah, maybe a future default for the agency world is distributed and work from home. Another reason why I think that is the case is a lot of the work we do perhaps is natively suitable for remote. If you think about the sort of conversations that you need to have, oftentimes they're confidential conversations that the candidate cannot have during standard work hours. And yet we're locked to this fixed schedule, right? Which is why we end up sitting in the office at 8 o'clock in the evening, because we need to make that call to the guy who we want to recruit, but he can't take that call in the office. Why are we burning all that time? It makes much more sense for us to have a flexed schedule so that we can say, right, the only time I can really make candidate calls is going to be 7 to 9 before the working day, or 6 to 10 after the working day. Those are the hours I'll do. So I think probably we will find that we suit remote working very much. But there's other challenges associated with that. Can we meet people? And we'll talk about that a bit later, how we virtualize some of this, but how do we get the face-to-face action? How do we build relationships with clients from a digital sort of position? If we are in-house or HR folks, how do we recruit against culture? Stuff like that. Typically requires, or we thought required, to be in person. So a lot of we're talking second order effects here, but there'd be third and fourth order effects from this work from home shift. So as an example, right? Everyone's seen this. Everyone's probably unpleasantly being part of these types of calls, but it requires new skills. You look, for instance, the reason why I show this thing up, because you can see who amongst all of these people here on this, 20 people on this Zoom call, which one of these actually understood that they need to mute their microphone when they are not speaking or don't have the floor? Probably around half of them. But there's a lot of them that haven't done that. Why? It's not because they're all speaking. It's because they don't understand the etiquette of muting their mic during a group Zoom call. So I use this example not to denigrate any of these folks here, but simply to say we need to learn new skills as to how to use these things. It's not just a simple case of switching on your webcam and off you go. Are you taking care of your sound environment? Are you taking care of your visual environment? Because what is happening in your screen actually affects other people when you do all of these things. So there's a huge etiquette, social etiquette that's emerged and that we will need to learn as we go through. This is part of the recruiter skill shift that we need to really get familiar with really quickly. So traditional recruiter, we meet in person. We now have to conduct a lot of this stuff remotely. Maybe we'll end up staying this way. How do we build relationships with candidates? How do we build relationships with clients? How do we build relationships with hiring managers when we have to default to remote? Chances are we could use a lot of our skills already, but I suspect there'll be a big shift in terms of the types of things that we need to use. I'm reminded actually, Ian, very much of the time when I think you and I are old enough to remember recruiting before the internet existed. And that was when the telephone was the primary way you did it. You know, you had a Rolodex, you had a phone number, you had a phone. And there was some extraordinarily good recruiters who were able to do their business without a screen and without a keyboard. But when the internet arrived and screens and keyboards and email and internet really took over as the primary way in which we were interacting with the people we wanted to deal with, a lot of the phone-based guys weren't able to transition. They didn't have the skills to do it, or they didn't have the motivation to learn these new skills. And I think this shift from remote presents us with a very similar type of experience. We've gone from email and internet to video, and can we kind of transition that way? A lot of us, I think we can't do that. Won't do it, and that would be a mistake. It would be the same mistake as those telephone guys who are amazing top billers, but they didn't learn how to write a decent email. And guess what? They're probably no longer in the business. We're in that moment now. Okay, so actions for recruiters. I would recommend that we become the remote work experts. Remember, all of our clients are probably encountering exactly the same problems right now. One of the value add things that we can perform is actually to become expert at this and help those organizations make that transition, help those candidates make that transition, help every single stakeholder that we deal with handle this extraordinary situation. We've got two reasons why we might be good at this. Firstly, we are practically, we have experiential learning right now. We're all doing it ourselves as number one. Number two, we still need to recruit where we can. And when we are recruiting, we're recruiting for people in this remote and virtualized way. So we're learning a lot as we go ahead and do this. I think the action for recruiters in this is to really embrace, deep dive, become the experts at this, and be able to advise organizations how we can actually virtualize a lot of the systems and processes that we're using. So read the remote work manifesto. There's companies out there that have been doing it since before COVID. They're the organizations that we really need to learn from. The literature is starting to expand now. And I really respect organizations that have been remote only from the get-go, because they haven't reacted to COVID-19. They've strategized about creating remote working. So they've really intentionally thought about how to do all of this. And GitLab is one of those organizations I'd recommend everyone follow. Their remote manifesto is freely downloadable, freely available. Go and follow them. You'll learn a lot. Secondly, we need to kind of get better tech. I mean, it sounds really trivial. Like, why the hell do I need to spend money doing this? But bear in mind that video may well be the first, the way in which we make first impressions now. And in the same way that we used to spend money on a business suit, we now need to spend just a little bit on slightly better tech. Now the reason why we need to do that is quite simply, as we do more and more video calls, we're going to be less and less tolerant as to poor experience coming the other way. It's kind of similar to our tolerance to slow loading websites. Once we've encountered a speedy loading website, we become really annoyed that it's taken 3 seconds, all of 3 seconds to load a page, and we skip. We're going to have the same situation with video. As more and more video is being done, and as more and more of our communication goes to video, the AV quality that we kind of subject other people to will be part of how our impression comes across. And if we've got terrible audio, or our camera is not particularly good quality, we're going to end up creating a subliminal bad impression, which obviously as recruiters we should not be doing. As recruiters, we need to get that bang on. Some of this stuff, by the way, you can go like ridiculous professional level and spend all of your remaining cash. I would not recommend that. But you can actually get consumer level tech that will do the job. $50 would probably get you a significant upgrade on your laptop webcam. And a mic might cost you, a mic really doesn't cost that much at all. You just got to get the thing close to your mouth. And that's the one thing I've learned, is that if the mic is close enough, you basically reduce the amount of space the sound has to travel before it gets picked up, then actually the sound quality gets better. And sit in front of natural light, which is why I'm sitting at the kitchen window right now. Not because, I particularly like the kitchen, is because it's got the best light for doing a video call. So basic techniques, we need to kit up a little bit better, particularly if we're recruiting. Okay, and also, let's not also forget this element. None of our lives have been configured for remote working as a default. We've got all kinds of things going on in the work and home place. Kids, dogs, family, other people, all those types of things. I think the era of us trying to pretend we don't have those things going on is over. We need to embrace that. But this is also a place where recruiters can learn and teach other organizations how to do this. So I think very important, for instance, that we move to an authentic way of communicating and to be very honest. It's almost inevitable that when you do video, it becomes authentic. You know more about someone on the video than you would otherwise do on a telephone call. For instance, I have red tiles on my kitchen. This is an incidental thing, but you've picked something up from knowing that. And if there's a kid walking through, or there's a person, sharing the house with me, etc., you'll also know those people. So we're going to move, I think, to a much more authentic, quote unquote, less branded way of communicating, which is probably a good thing. But again, recruiters can take the lead in this. This is something we can learn and teach our customers, and whether they're internal or external. Okay, moving on. Second order effect number 3, war on talent. Forget about it. It's now the war on jobs. The candidate market has entirely flipped. We all know this. When 12 weeks ago, there was a massive competition for the top talent. Everyone was focusing on how do we do sourcing? How do we attract people? How do we engage people that won't talk to us? That was the condition of the recruiting market. That has entirely flipped in the last 12 weeks or so. There's now a surfeit of this talent simply because people are being let go and the economy has gone into a contraction rather than growth. A couple of examples for you. So this is a comparison of job applications to job offers. It's not a particularly great chart, but if you look at the figures from 2019 to 2020, you can see there's a divergence between the volume of job applicants and the volume of job offers. And that is actually a really recent change from the start of this year. And those types of trends will simply increase simply because more people will be made redundant or being made to feel insecure, and companies will be very hesitant to make permanent job offers. A quick chart in terms of the sorts of industries that have hiring freezes. You can see there's variation here, but lots of organizations have been very, very stringent in freezing things. Other organizations not. Interestingly, in things like, for instance, IT infrastructure, business software, productivity software, education software, all of those places seem to be still in better condition than things like transport or retail. So there's certain sectors, and this pertains to the, I think, earlier question that someone asked about, do you want to pivot to a sector that might be thriving? Answers, yeah, I would do that at least as a short term for revenue, emergency worker hiring in particular. But even if you think midterm, it kind of makes sense for you to reposition if you can. Okay, and this is from Tripod, I think, another chart to tell you, okay, there's like loads of applications compared to, this is job applicant data, by the way. And the red line that you can see, it compares to the yellow line, to the black line, and to the blue line. So it's quite hard to pick out in this chart, but you can see there's just these massive spikes of job applicants flowing into adverts, where previously, over the last week, month, and year, it was fairly steady. So we have a complete reversal of the marketplace. No longer is it a case where it's a seller's market, it's a buyer's market. Okay, impact for recruiters. There's a shift in how and who we recruit. This is what we want to do more of and less of. We're going to do less advertising. Why? Because when you advertise, you'll be inundated with candidates. You then have a candidate or applicant management problem. You typically don't want to do that. You're going to source more. So for the kind of highly skilled in demand, we're still going to source those people, because if you put out an advert for a software engineer, you're going to get all kinds of people who are unfortunately desperate for work. They're going to flood in. And you won't be able to deal with it. So I think we're going to do even more sourcing for those highly skilled people that we're still recruiting for. Acquiring candidates. This is going to be less of a concern. We're going to have to handle the assessment side a lot more, focus on dealing with these applicants that are flowing into us. And less external and more internal. You speak to any CHRO, any organization that is going through redundancy, redeployment, those types of scenarios, one of the first things in the top of mind for those HR and CHRO people is, how do we redeploy our staff rather than let them go? How do we activate effectively internal mobility? Because we really don't want to make these people redundant or have to let them go. So recruiters who previously never thought about internal recruitment will probably have an opportunity to do some internal sourcing and start moving people internally around before we go external. So there's going to be a flip in terms of our focus of how we do our recruitment jobs. So action for recruiters, we need to rethink the acquisition side. It may not be just acquiring. The companies may not be that interested in simply, taking on more payroll. Companies are interested in redistributing staff, retaining staff where they can, and maybe hiring people that don't carry sort of the cultural and financial penalties of hiring someone permanently. Companies have had to make some really tough decisions, letting a large percentage of their populations, their workforce populations go. They may not wish to repeat that, even if there is a rebound in the economy. So what does that mean for recruiters? We need to think, instead of talent acquisition, we need to think, can we be a talent access function? Can we be the function that helps the business access the skills when they need, and how they need it, irrespective of what type of contract these people might be part of. So for instance, these people might come from a platform in future. They may be contractors, expand that sort of population. They may be internal staff, which we never thought about. They may yet still be permanent, or they may be outsourced providers. Right now, talent acquisition only really thinks about permanent. We need to really expand our scope to take on the other types of worker that we can anticipate our organizations needing to use. And that means we need to change what skills we have. We need to be multifunctional and cross-disciplinary. We can't just say, oh, we're sourcing, or we're great at advertising, or we're great at this segment of the recruiting funnel. We need to be much more multifunctional. If we can't do it ourselves in terms of upskilling, we certainly need to be working with cross-functional colleagues that can support us in doing that. So less basically of, having a team of 10 360 recruiters that do everything, but having individuals that have unique skills that can help support the access of these types of talents. And we're going to need different engagement and assessment models for each of these folks. The old idea of having a single recruiting pipeline and a single recruiting process, that is not going to fly when you're recruiting for different types of people. Would you, for instance, put an internal candidate through a candidate funnel designed for an external applicant? Doesn't make sense. Would you do that for an individual that is a platform worker? Doesn't make sense. We need to redesign our assessment and engagement models for each of these categories of worker that we need to access. Okay, nearly there. Second order effect number 4, accelerating automation. Again, underlying trend that was happening pre-COVID, but probably is now accelerated after COVID. Example of this. This is a chart, I think, from 2000 and I think it was 2017. Yes, it is. But it shows you where the distribution of labor is in the US over the course of time. And you can see things have changed generally in the sense that the labor-intensive tangible economy, what we call the tangible economy, as in physical moving of things, has been a declining part of the workforce, or the work that the workforce did over the decades. And we've moved to what we call the intangible economy, professional work and stuff like this. Automation. This is where you're looking at the types of hours spent on the categories of skills that you're doing. Basic physical and manual, basic cognitive skills, all of those go down. Organizations are looking for higher cognitive, social, emotional, and technological skills. These are underlying trends, basically, that were occurring before COVID-19. This event is likely to accelerate all of this. So again, full-time workers potentially displaced, significant. This chart actually is from, I think there's an app actually which allows you to do a country by country. So I'll share that in, maybe I can share that with you later, Ian, and you can distribute it to delegates if they're interested, and you can see where your country might align on this. But again, regional variance as to how significant automation might be for full-time employment on a per country basis. And this is happening now, really, in the COVID era. So in the last 12 weeks, we've seen all kinds of roboticism and workforce automation really directly related to COVID-19. You're looking at delivery. Do we really want a human being delivering our food? Maybe in a year's time, we'll think that that's the most insane thing that we'd ever think about. We have on the top left here an image of what are nurses dispensing sort of sanitary sanitizer gel. And we know, for instance, that healthcare workers are one of the most heavily exposed of this pandemic because they work in proximity with a lot of ill people and likely to become ill themselves. In the near future, in fact, in the current, because this is happening now, maybe a lot of the nursing work at the front line may be dispensed by a robot instead of a human. And food dispensary, would we ever go to a restaurant where a human being would manage the food, manipulate it, and process it? Maybe we want a robot to do that. So we're seeing this already, innovations where automation will occur directly associated with sanitization. Oh, hang on. Why is this not moving? Oh, here we go. And we already see this, by the way, in the sense that there are already implementations of robot technology in the recruitment process. This is a picture of a Swedish tech company called Tengai, which is a robot head interviewer. Now, they didn't invent this because they were thinking about COVID-19, but they invented it because they thought it was a really good way to collect information from candidates in a non-biased way. In other words, this robot would not give any visual micro kind of expression to the candidate, which would potentially prejudice that candidate's performance. So automation already exists in different parts of our industry, visibly in examples like this, but less visibly in things like software automation. Bots that will help us calendar schedule things, or help us auto write a message. Or may kind of interact with candidates on our behalf. So these trends, I think, are likely to accelerate with COVID-19. We're going to lose a lot of workers. Companies, CEO responses to this is not going to be to recruit back exactly those same workers. They're going to replicate the functions as much as they can with automation. So the impact for recruiters, well, we need to think, where the hell is automation happening already? And is it happening in places where we spend most of our time? Remember the chart where we say basic level cognitive skills are in the second most likely to be automated after physical and manual. Think about the basic cognitive skills that recruiters currently do. And maybe that's too big a percentage of the time we spend. Here's a list, not quite a list, a distribution, if you like, of the activities a recruiter, agency, or in-house might be doing. Which ones of these are low cognitive basic skills? Probably all those things in red. All the stuff in green, they're higher social emotional skills, which would be difficult to automate. And the stuff in yellow may go either way. But if you look at what the core responsibilities of your job, if you did a kind of a time distribution of your activities over the course of a normal working week, we'll spend most of our time doing sourcing, messaging, scheduling, handling of candidates. All of these things are imminently automatable. And we need to be very aware of that. Okay, so actions for recruiters. Well, we have to own workforce automation. No point in trying to resist the tide. This is happening. We actually need to take control of it, because if we don't, someone else is going to do it, and we're going to be at the wrong end of what happens at the end of it. So we need to basically expand the scope of the job horizontally. What we currently do, we need to do a lot of stuff ahead of this cluster, and we need to do a lot of stuff after this cluster. That basically means we need to do a lot of what marketing used to do: employer branding, community development, doing caring about the prospect experience rather than the candidate experience. We need to do a lot of stuff that HR probably currently does. What happens after the hire? Do we care about the employee experience? Do we map the applicant and assessment data with the employee performance data? Currently separate. Someone's got to go ahead and do that. So we need to expand the scope horizontally in order to secure ourselves against automation wave that's about to accelerate. And we need to expand the scope vertically, meaning we need to basically take control of the automation. Currently, right now, we're in the operating mode. We do the middle bit, right? We operate the sourcing, the messaging, the assessing. We do all of that. We need to go up and supervise the automation of the sourcing, supervise the automation of the messaging, the assessing, and the scheduling. And of course, these technologies need to be trained and evaluated. We also need to be the function responsible for that. What we don't want to do is end up seeing project managers or systems integrators or consultants from McKinsey coming in and helping us automate our systems. We need to be the people doing that. Okay.
Home, just to let you know that we are 3 minutes left. So
okay, very quickly then. Second order effect, final one, reevaluation of work. This has become one of the very significant things that we've been aware of over time. These are the key workers, by the way. Categories of key workers taken from the US government. You will notice a lot of these folks are healthcare workers, sanitation workers, public transport workers, individuals that probably are not watching this webinar right now. So we're finding out really quickly who are really doing the essential work. And generally speaking, it's not people typing into keyboards and looking at screens. It's these folks. And these are the people that are actually also some of the less rewarded, most poorly remunerated individuals in society right now also. Turns out they're essential to keep the lights on and the food in the shops. One of the impacts of this is that we are seeing a doubling of wages going to these people. An example from earlier last month, where the weekly average pay for a nurse has jumped from $17,000, $1,700, should I say, in January to nearly $3,000 in March. That's a massive increase of the weekly salary. This probably is a good thing, but it also, I think, is a sign that we're on the way to reevaluating what is actually valuable in work and how we reward that. Impact on recruiters, shift in social contract. We remember this chart currently did all of this. We're going to end up, the reason why we did all the red stuff, by the way, is because we valued the red stuff more. We get paid for being good sources and being paid for good messages and good basically fillers of jobs. But perhaps we end up getting more focused and targeted and KPI'd on things like community management, candidate care, management of stakeholders, those things that are less tangible but require more human soft skills. That's probably where we need to be more measured and more rewarded on. Okay, really quick. We need to move from hard to soft skill development. How do you do that? Join communities. You volunteer, engage with other people, make sure you diversify your perspectives. Read books, particularly fiction. It's a great way to think about how another person lives. Don't just think about reading productivity stuff or things that have these transactional returns to you. Try and expand your mind by interacting or thinking about the lives that other people lead. Okay, very quickly. We're just going to whistle through this because you've heard it all before. We've got no time. This slide will be shared by Ian, so you've got all of this stuff. I will recommend you subscribe to the newsletter and actually get involved with any of those places. That's where you can learn more and interact with either myself or other people in the Brainfood community. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Fantastic. Thanks, folks. We will promote everything that you just talked about at the very end there because we're aware you've run out of time. I'm glad you definitely needed a drink there, Hunk, because you just spoke there non-stop for 50 minutes. So fantastic. I thought that was brilliant. A little bit sobering, I have to say, but very, very good indeed. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day wherever you are, and enjoy. I know one thing, it's made me feel very hungry, Hunk, because I've been sitting looking at your kitchen for the last 50 minutes as well. Everyone have a lovely evening, and we will be in touch very, very soon. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.